released within 1 or 2 years of the one before it. But between Riddle Transfer 1 and 2 is a 5-year gap, and before we get to playing the game I kind of wanted to explain what was going on with that gap. To summarize my original plans for Riddle Transfer to be a 5-part series, the first part is exactly what you saw in the previous video. I had in mind to make every game in the series before I released the first part, but then I got impatient and decided to release the first part anyways. What I forgot about is that by releasing this first part and having this setup, it was cementing my plans for the rest of the series, and I ended up not liking those plans very much. Part 2 was going to take place in the sewers, and it was just going to have all the characters going through the sewers. And I was trying to find ways of making this interesting. I didn't see any way to make it follow up the first part in any form or fashion that wouldn't be at least somewhat disappointing, and I didn't want to make a game that would be a disappointment to people. The only real idea that I had was maybe you could play as more than just Phil, you could play as the other characters, but there wasn't really a reason to do that. It just made the gameplay more inefficient in my opinion, so I didn't end up doing that. And I spent a very long time just trying to think of anything to make it better than the previous game and could come up with nothing. So I started over with a new idea for a second game, which was to play as Diz, who had just escaped in the previous game, and then I had in mind that he would get captured, or recaptured that is, and thrown into a little prison cell underground. And by doing this, it would basically become the same exact plot as the first Riddle Transfer, just in a different setting, and with a different character, and that seemed a little bit redundant to me. And not only that, but the way that I had the plot in mind, once you escaped as Diz, then he would just get recaptured again, rendering the entire game pointless story-wise. So that's something I didn't want to do either. I was trying to come up with a plot line for Riddle Transfer 2 for an entire year, I think, before I finally cancelled it along with the rest of the series, because the first game took 6 months. I didn't want to spend potentially 6 months or longer trying to make every other game in the series when all of them are free and I just wasn't enjoying myself. But to continue on, Riddle Transfer 3 was planned to be a simulation game that used elements of all the cancelled games that are mentioned in the Riddle School 5 special features, all the rejected Riddle games. So it was going to have like Riddle Company, Riddle Manor, Riddle Mansion, but I didn't like any of those games to begin with, and I was really only trying to make a game out of those abandoned ideas to please fans. That was just a really bad idea all around, and it made no sense. At the end of Riddle Transfer 3, there was going to be this character introduced named Shaw Delot, which was going to be an anagram for slow death, which didn't have any relevance, but it would be interesting. And with him was going to be revealed that Viz was alive. Wait a minute, how does that work? Because in Riddle School 5, Viz very clearly died, and it was impossible for him to come back. So how is he back? Well, the idea was that with his reveal, something would seem a little bit off, like maybe he wouldn't have all 4 of his arms for some reason, and they would try to have an explanation for that, or he would have all 4 of his arms, but 2 of them would be limp, or something along those lines. Maybe he wouldn't have the stitches on his mouth. But then after that, like after the characters get a brief glimpse of this Viz character who is actually Diz, but the Zone 5.1 people made it to where he was brainwashed and he looked like Viz for some reason. It didn't actually have any purpose. They throw the characters into what was going to be Riddle Transfer 4, a prison school. Basically just a school with some prison security, and it wasn't actually going to be a school, it was going to be more like a dungeon, and so it was going to be really dingy. And I think the idea with that one was that all 4 of the characters would be in different classrooms, and then you would try to play as all of them to escape from their individual rooms before trying to escape the building. And then Shaw Delot would be the headmaster of the building, and then you'd find a way to stop him, but only temporarily. And I kind of liked the idea for that game, but not enough to go through with it. It ended up kind of playing into what Riddle Transfer 2 ended up being, which is a school that's been taken over by different security. But once they finally escaped this prison school, as I called it, there was going to be a Riddle Transfer 5, which was this indoor playground. And it was going to be this fancy-ish place with lots of stuff going on. and that was going to be the game that uses a tune called Laser Tears of Science. I didn't really have puzzle ideas for any of the games in the series. I was just hoping that I would kind of come up with them as I went along, which was not a very good plan on my part. And the one puzzle that I had in mind for Riddle Transfer 5 was for there to be this big slide, and you would find some tinfoil and use the tinfoil on the slide so that whenever you go down it, you would have less friction and slide right over a gap, just like fly over it. That would have been a little bit cryptic if I didn't drop a lot of hints for it, but it was a kind of fun idea. I just didn't really want to make an entire series just to get to that point, to do that one simple little puzzle. Then, in the end, you would discover Shaw Delot's plans to take Zack, and he has his new burning genes instead of his freezing genes from before, and he would make his own death ray, and the death ray would burn the Earth. That was Shaw Delot's plan all along, for some reason. Like, maybe it was for science, I don't know, but there was no motivation behind it at all. The idea that I had for a climax was there would be this lava pit, a lot like the one in Riddle School 4, and then Phil would be thrown down into this lava pit, and he wouldn't die, he would just get very close to the bottom and then grab onto something, and then his friends would save him by doing these different puzzles. And in the end, when Diz is revealed to be Diz and not Viz, then save Phil himself as redemption for ditching everyone in the first game. Then I think Shaw Delot would try to reach for Phil and then end up falling in the lava himself or something. I think that was kind of the purpose there. My idea for an ending was that Diz would finally fly back off into space, the kids would return home, and they would live their lives going through school again with no regrets, and Phil finally gets to college and everything is fine. And that's the part that I really wanted to make the most, but I didn't want to make a really substanceless, repetitive fan service series to get to that point. I was pretty much certain that I wasn't going to use these plans, so I revealed them on Newgrounds at the same time that I cancelled the series. I just had them kind of jointed into two different posts, the cancellation post and the post about all the discarded plans. And I figured if people knew that the series was cancelled, then they would stop asking for it. But that wasn't the case. People always asked for more. And eventually I got so fed up with it that, kind of on a whim, I deleted all of my files on my computer for Riddle School 1 through 5 and Riddle Transfer. And I think technically I might still have those files on some distant hard drive, but it's so far gone that I don't think I'll ever see it again. It's weird because I still kind of wanted to finish the story and wrap up the cliffhanger, but I wanted it less and less and less the more that people begged for it. I deleted those files because of the vocal minority of my fans who felt like I needed to make something for them instead of for myself. After that, I kind of wanted to distance myself from the Riddle School series as much as possible, and that kind of coincided with how I wanted to change my name from John Bro to something else anyway, so I just associated Riddle School with John Bro and left it behind while switching to this new Johnochrome name. And basically said, that's in a past life, I'm done with it now. But at the same time, I always kept using my John Bro Newgrounds account to respond to messages that I might have received about Riddle School, because I had this sort of lingering feeling that maybe I need to come back to it, like I had some unfinished business on Newgrounds to take care of, because there was that cliffhanger hanging over me. Flash forward about 4 years, when I have barely thought about Riddle School for a long time. I had a sudden motivation to right some wrongs with my life, to fix parts of my personality, and to change some things about myself that I just didn't like. And my reasons for this are explained in the special features of Riddle Transfer 2. And one of those wrongs that I wanted to make right was the cliffhanger at the end of Riddle Transfer, which made the series end on a really unsatisfying point. If Riddle Transfer didn't end in an unsatisfying way like that, I wouldn't have bothered making a sequel. The inspiration really kicked in whenever I realized that Riddle School's 10th anniversary was 3 weeks away, especially since I didn't want to spend longer than 3 weeks making another Riddle School game, since I was basically done with it. And around that same time, I found out that big YouTubers like the Diamond Minecart, Jacksepticeye were playing the Riddle School games, and that blew my mind, because they've been not really relevant for a long time. All the stars aligned. There was no way that I could